My dad sold our childhood home, then moved in with his secret mistress, and everyone expected me to pretend nothing happened. I found out the same day the moving truck arrived. Not from my dad, not from family, not from some heartfelt conversation. I found out because a woman I'd never seen before answered the front door of my childhood home. She looked confused. I looked confused. Then she smiled awkwardly and said, "Oh, you must be Ethan." That was the moment I knew something was very wrong. My dad had sold the house 3 weeks earlier. Nobody told me, and somehow this stranger knew my name. I wish I could say that was the biggest shock. It wasn't. The biggest shock was learning that half my family already knew exactly who she was, and they had been hiding it from me for almost 2 years. My parents divorced when I was 26. At least that's what everyone called it. A divorce. A mutual decision. Two people growing apart. That's the story my dad repeated constantly. It's nobody's fault. Your mother and I just want different things. We'll always be family. The problem was that none of it matched reality. My mom was devastated. She lost weight, stopped sleeping, started questioning everything she'd done during their 31-year marriage. Meanwhile, my dad seemed strangely fine, almost relieved. At the time, I thought maybe he'd simply accepted it faster. Now I know better. The first clue appeared months after the divorce. Dad suddenly became obsessed with privacy. He changed passwords, stopped sharing his location, started taking calls outside. If anyone asked who he was talking to, he'd laugh it off. Work stuff. The weird part was that he had retired 6 months earlier. Mom noticed, I noticed, but nobody pushed too hard. The divorce was already painful enough. Then came the second clue. Dad stopped bringing family photos to gatherings. It sounds small, but my father loved displaying family pictures. Every barbecue, every holiday, every birthday, photos everywhere. And suddenly they vanished. When my aunt jokingly asked where they went, Dad said he was decluttering. At the time, nobody thought much of it. Now that answer feels different, like he was already preparing to erase a life he no longer wanted. About a year after the divorce, Dad announced he was selling the house. The house. The place where my sister and I grew up. The place Mom had spent decades decorating. The place where every Christmas happened, every birthday, every family dinner. Everything. Dad owned it because it had belonged to his parents before they passed away. Legally, he could sell it. But emotionally it felt wrong, especially because he seemed oddly eager. The house sold within weeks. When I asked where he planned to move, he gave vague answers. "I'll figure something out. I might downsize. I'm looking around." Nothing specific, nothing concrete. Then one Saturday I decided to stop by. I wanted to grab a few boxes from the garage before the new owners moved in. That's when the woman answered the door. She was probably in her late 50s, nicely dressed. Comfortable, not nervous, not surprised, like she belonged there. The house wasn't hers, at least I didn't think it was. Then she said my name. My stomach dropped. I asked who she was. She hesitated, just long enough. Then she said, "I'm Claire." Nothing else, just Claire. Then my father appeared behind her. The look on his face told me everything, not because he looked guilty. Because he looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted something, like I was the problem, not the fact that a stranger was standing in my childhood home. "Dad," I said. "What is this?" He sighed, actually sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "Ethan, let's not do this." That sentence changed everything. Let's not do this. Not an explanation, not an introduction, not even a denial, just let's not do this. I left without another word. 10 minutes later, my phone exploded. My aunt called, then my cousin, then my sister, all saying variations of the same thing. "Please hear him out. There's more to the story. Don't overreact." That was when I realized something even worse. People already knew. I called my sister. "What exactly do you know?" Silence, a long silence. Then she said, "Dad didn't want you finding out this way." "Finding out what?" Another pause. Then she finally told me. Claire wasn't new. She had been in Dad's life for nearly 2 years. 2 years, almost the entire period surrounding the divorce. I felt physically sick. My sister immediately started defending him. She said nothing happened until after the marriage ended. She repeated it several times, like she'd memorized the line. Nothing happened until after the marriage ended. Maybe, maybe not. The problem was that nobody could explain why everything had been kept secret. If it was innocent, why lie? If the timing was clean, why hide her? The answers never came, only excuses. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Old memories, small details, comments that suddenly meant something. Claire wasn't actually a stranger. I'd met her years earlier, just briefly. She worked with one of Dad's friends at a community organization. I remembered seeing her at a charity dinner, then another event, then another, always nearby, always somehow present. At the time, she seemed insignificant. Now she appeared everywhere, like a person quietly inserted into family history. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. Then my mother revealed something she had never told me. About 6 months before the divorce, she confronted Dad, not about cheating, about Claire specifically. Mom said she'd noticed how often Claire's name came up, how frequently Dad mentioned her, how protective he became whenever anyone criticized her. Dad insisted Mom was imagining things. He accused her of being insecure, jealous, paranoid. Mom eventually apologized for questioning her husband. That detail made me furious, because even if there had been no affair, Dad knew exactly why Mom was concerned. And instead of addressing it honestly, he made her doubt herself. I thought that was the worst revelation. Then Christmas arrived, and everything got worse. Dad announced he wanted Claire included in family celebrations. Immediately. No transition period, no discussion, no sensitivity, just show up and act normal. Some relatives agreed instantly. Others looked uncomfortable, but nobody challenged him directly. Then Claire started telling stories. Stories about Dad, trips they'd taken, restaurants they loved, inside jokes, shared memories. The timeline didn't make sense, not completely, not necessarily proof of anything, but enough to create questions. Questions nobody wanted answered. The atmosphere became unbearable. My mother stopped attending gatherings. Several cousins quietly distanced themselves. The family split into camps. People who wanted peace, and people who wanted honesty. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Not about cheating, about money. My grandmother had left behind a collection of handwritten journals, nothing dramatic, just decades of family memories. After Dad sold the house, those journals ended up in storage. My cousin was helping organize boxes when she found something tucked inside one of them, an envelope, addressed to Dad. It wasn't hidden, just forgotten. The letter was from nearly 4 years earlier, long before the divorce, long before Claire officially entered the picture. My cousin sent me photos. The letter wasn't romantic, it wasn't scandalous. What mattered was who wrote it. Claire. She thanked Dad for helping her through a difficult financial situation. She mentioned how much his support meant, how she didn't know what she would have done without him, and one line stood out, one line I couldn't stop thinking about. "Thank you for always putting me first when nobody else would." Putting me first. That phrase haunted me, because it explained something I hadn't understood. This wasn't just a secret relationship. This was a priority. A long-term priority, one that seemed to predate the divorce by years. I confronted Dad. I expected denial. Instead, he surprised me. He told the truth, at least part of it. He admitted he'd become emotionally attached to Claire before the marriage ended, not physically, emotionally. He repeated that distinction several times, like it mattered. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Then he said something I'll never forget. "I felt more appreciated by her than I did by your mother." For a second, I almost understood. Almost. Long marriages are complicated. People drift apart. People feel unseen. I can accept that. What I couldn't accept was what came next. Dad admitted he'd been helping Claire financially for years, nothing extreme, but enough. Car repairs, bills, personal loans, various expenses, money Mom knew nothing about, money that came from joint accounts. I just stared at him, because suddenly every argument about finances during the divorce made sense. Every fight, every accusation, every mystery. Mom kept insisting money had been disappearing. Dad kept saying she was mistaken. She wasn't mistaken. He had simply found a different place to spend it. When I asked why he never told anyone, his answer was immediate. Nobody would have understood. That was the problem. He never gave anyone the chance. He decided what everyone could handle. He decided what truths people deserved. He decided what version of events protected him best. Then another piece finally clicked. The house. The reason he'd sold it so quickly. The reason he seemed desperate to move on. The reason family photos disappeared. The reason Claire already felt at home there. He wasn't starting over. He had already started over years earlier. The house sale wasn't a new chapter. It was the final step in a chapter he'd been writing in secret. When word spread about the financial support, the family dynamic changed overnight. Some relatives who had defended Dad began backing away, not because he'd fallen in love with someone else, because they'd realized how much information had been withheld. Trust evaporated. My sister struggled the most. She'd spent years defending him, years repeating his version of events. Now she felt manipulated too. For the first time, she admitted she had never known the full story. Neither had anyone else, except maybe Claire. Months later, Dad tried repairing relationships. He invited everyone to dinner. He apologized. Sort of his apology focused on secrecy, not consequences, not the impact on Mom, not the years of confusion, just secrecy. Even then, he couldn't fully acknowledge what happened. He still viewed himself as someone who had simply followed his heart. Maybe that's true, maybe he did, but following your heart doesn't erase what happens to everyone standing in the path. Eventually, I met Claire again, just the two of us. I expected anger. Instead, I found something stranger. She genuinely believed the relationship had been justified. She talked about loneliness, connection, feeling understood. The way she described it, nobody had set out to hurt anyone. They'd simply prioritized their own happiness. I actually believe she meant it. That's what made everything so complicated. Nobody was a cartoon villain. Nobody sat around plotting destruction. They just kept making choices that benefited themselves. And every uncomfortable truth got pushed aside until it became impossible to ignore. Today, Dad still lives with Claire. Most of the family remains cordial. Some relationships recovered. Others didn't. My mother eventually rebuilt her life. She's happier now than she was during the final years of the marriage. Ironically, she says the divorce was probably necessary. But she also says she wishes she'd been given the truth instead of years of confusion. I agree, because the hardest part wasn't losing the house. It wasn't Claire. It wasn't even the divorce. It was realizing how many people spent years helping maintain a version of reality that wasn't real. Every vague explanation, every half-truth, every awkward silence, every request to keep the peace. All of it protected the people making the decisions while everyone else paid the emotional cost. The childhood home is gone now. Another family lives there. The photos are scattered across different houses. The traditions never fully recovered. And whenever I drive past that street, I don't think about the divorce anymore. I think about how easy it is for people to rewrite a story when they are afraid of being judged. My dad wanted everyone to believe his new life started after the marriage ended. The truth was that it started long before he admitted it. And once I understood that, I finally understood why nothing ever seemed to make sense. The mystery wasn't whether my father loved Claire. The mystery was why so many people helped protect the illusion. The answer turned out to be painfully simple. Nobody wanted to be the person who forced the truth into the open. So they stayed quiet. And sometimes the damage caused by silence lasts far longer than the secret itself.